Sirens rang out over the Iraqi capital on Wednesday night. It's not clear who was behind the rocket attack in the Green Zone, a high-security enclave where the U.S. Embassy is located. There were no casualties, but it's a sign that some are still seeking revenge for the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Earlier, the U.S. president announced non-military action it would take against Tehran.
As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior.
But Tehran says it will not be cowed by threats of any kind.
Well, we did not start this process of escalation. The United States waged an economic war against Iran. The United States has to come to its senses. If it wants to deal with these people, it has to deal with these people based on respect, not based on threat and not based on sanctions.
I want to thank you, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Donald Trump says Iran has stood down from the conflict. It appears that for the president, this tense chapter is closed. But is it also closed for their archenemy?
And for some analysis, I'm joined by Rachel Rizzo. She's at the think tank, the Bosch Foundation, as well as Iraqi journalist Amir Mousavi is with me in the studio. Welcome to both of you. Amir, if I may start with you. As we heard, Donald Trump says that Iran is standing down, backing down. Is that how this is being viewed in the region?
I think the signal went from Iran towards the United States in two directions. First, we are not interested in directing war with the United States, and that is our reaction for killing Soleimani. But at the same time, they keep their capability active for the next part of discussion, maybe. Even if they going to go to the discussion with the United States about possible solution for all this conflict.
And Richard, turning to you, as we heard, Donald Trump didn't talk about military action in this statement, eagerly awaited statement, but he did talk about sanctions and putting Iran under maximum pressure till it changes its behavior. So what is the message there?
So I think the question to ask is, what more is there left to sanction, and what is the ultimate goal? And most importantly, what is the efficacy of those sanctions? If the goal really is to change Iranian behavior, I think you really have to ask if more sanctions and attempting further economic destruction is really the way to do that.
And I mean, we know that Iran is already crippled by U.S. sanctions, and we heard in our report the Iranian foreign minister talk about treat the people of Iran with respect, not with threats and sanctions. So if more sanctions are put on, how damaging is this going to be for Iran?
I think these sanctions, as we said, is already got the maximum level against Iran. But I think the European could make a good job in this question when it comes to discussion with Iran, not because of the sanctions, but maybe rewards. I think the next step will be diplomatic way, and talking about reducing the sanctions against Iran to force her to change its behavior in the region. I think in the end of the day, we learned from that crisis that the power and the violence will not bring, in the end of the day, bring the solution. Maybe the diplomatic solution will be better.
So both of you are saying perhaps this threat of sanctions is a hollow threat, and the time now to move is towards diplomacy, and you're saying, Amir, from the European side. But one other issue that Donald Trump raised was the question of the Iran nuclear deal. And he once again urged the other signatories to this deal, from which the US has withdrawn, to actually also abandon this, what is called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. What do you think about that, Rachel?
So I think the current state of the JCPOA is one of the very unfortunate outcomes of the Trump administration. You know, the Europeans have been trying to hold this deal together It wasn't perfect. It was never perfect, but it was better than nothing. And so trying to hold this deal together after the U.S. pulled out is a really tough spot to be in. And so I think after this latest move, the Europeans might not even have to listen to that call. Trump might have put the final nail in the coffin himself. And
Amir, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think in the end of the day, we saw that the Iranian, for example, street get more unification. I talked with some people against the Iranian regime living abroad in Europe. They say, we are, of course, against Iran regime, but that's what's happened there. It is a national thing. And I think through that, I would say it's a wrong reaction from the United States. Iran got more a spirit, a national spirit in the public, and unified the Iranian public. And also that's why no one talked about the protester in Iran a month before.
Absolutely. Rachel, and a final question to you. There were protests in both Iraq and Iran before this targeted assassination of General Soleimani. There's some people who describe this, the U.S. policy of this targeted killing, as an own goal. Because as we heard from Amir, it has got more support now for the Iranian regime. The presence of U.S. troops in Iraq has been called into doubt, and Iran feels it can go ahead with its nuclear program without any restrictions. Yeah, and this is interesting. It's interesting you say this, because a lot of people in the U.S. are calling this a win. But I think this is what Trump is really good at. He's good at creating conflict, taking the U.S. to the brink, and if things de-escalate, taking credit for it himself and calling it a win. So I think we'll have to really wait and see what happens next year. Absolutely. I think we just have to see how this plays out. And meanwhile, Rachel Rizzo, an American analyst, as well as Amir Mousavi, a journalist from the Middle East, thank you both very much for your analysis.